Are these hands good for violin and viola playing? Or is there a problem? Well, I certainly had one, but I didn't know exactly what was going on, and it took me like 40 years to clearly see through what it was, and then it was actually quite easy to address it and fix it. I started playing the violin pretty late, maybe when I was 12. And before that, I played the guitar only. So I started playing the violin. And I was pretty tall as a kid, still pretty tall. And so I started off with a full-size violin, 12 years old. So pretty large hands, long arms, no problem at all. But then after 2 or 3 years, I was progressing really quite nicely. My teacher was quite happy with me. So I started playing the Telemann solo sonatas. And in those solo sonatas, there's lots of chords to play. Double stops, triple, quadruple stops. And it went okay, but I had some issues playing those cleanly. And I also took part in a competition where I played this, and then of course there's a little bit of nervousness, and it all went really kind of bad. And that was very frustrating. And I believe that was a killer for my career as a proper musician. Which is maybe lucky for you guys, because, you know, at some point it got me to making bows instead of playing only. But anyways, so what was going on there? The problem is that for a tall person, the bones are also taller, not only longer, but wider. So I have pretty wide hips, for example. I have pretty wide hands. So my glove size is extra large, or 10, whatever. And though my fingers are not meaty at all, the fingertips, the bones that are inside this finger, they're actually pretty wide. And if you look at my middle finger, it is 17, index is 18, ring finger is 16 millimeter wide, which is a lot more than, for example, the fingers of most smaller people, or let's say women. And the issue that I had was when you play double stops where you play over 2 or 3 strings, my fingers do not only press down the one string, but they touch both the neighboring strings. And so these double stops never sound clean, and sometimes they don't ring out properly at all. And that was causing me lots of trouble. You know, there's a lot of stuff where you just play melody on one string, it's not a problem. Or when you play double stops only, when you have 2 strings, I could always lean the fingers to the other string that's not needed at that point. But it was always giving me problems, because you have extra work to do, as you have always sort out your fingers to check which side your finger may lean on and which one it has to be free of. So it's like extra double work. And I wonder, do we really have to live with that? I mean, just imagine you walk into a shoe shop and all they have is size 40, like for everybody. Would you find that very strange? Or, you know, you need some googles and there's only like one thickness of lenses. So mine's 2 dioptrine for everybody. Is that it? Or bicycles all in one size. So tough luck if you got short legs or long legs. So, you know, you have to make do with that. But that's how the violin world obviously works. Weird, isn't it? So anyways, so I've figured that out, and I thought to myself, why, you know, what does it change if I change the string spacing? And I did. So I found a violin here in my shop that had a slightly wider neck, and I fitted in new fingerboard and gave it, instead of the typical 23 millimeter, I gave it 25 millimeter width here at the upper nut. And instead of 16.5, 17 millimeter string spacing, I made it 19 and a little bit. With the idea to get my 18 millimeter wide fingers in between. And when I started playing with that, it was really not easy for me not to cry, really. And I wanted to shout at the same time, because after 40 years of practicing like crazy on Bach and Telemann and all this stuff, and I could never do it, you know, thinking I'm too stupid or got the wrong technique or whatever. It was such a simple solution. You know, all of a sudden it was so easy. I mean, no, Bach is still difficult to play. It's a lot of black ink. You have to cover, but yeah, it was like all the impossible parts of it were just gone away. And the nice bit about it was that everything sounded nicer because I was not stopping unintentionally the neighboring strings all the time. So there's more resonance. So it sounds a little bit nicer. But really the key thing was that I can now properly practice and play, practice Bach. And now there's joy in it, it's fun. Whereas in the past, you know, if I was good, maybe I managed to put in half an hour of trying some partitas and sonatas, and then I gave up. And now I really enjoy doing it. So how does that come about? If you go back in history, like 300 years, you will see that Baroque violins actually had wider fingerboards. They were as wide as this. So how comes they got narrower and narrower? Well, one very simple explanation is that every fingerboard wears off. So you have to scrape it off and at some point replace it. Let's say every 10 years or so, when the violin is played a lot, maybe even faster than that. And what you do, every time you fix in your fingerboard, you have to flush the fingerboard and the neck. And every time you scrape off a little bit of wood, just a tiny little bit, tenths of a millimeter, maybe 2. But you do that 10 times, 20 times, and the neck is 1 millimeter more narrow, or even more than that. And the fingerboard gets also more narrow. And you know, actually when you play, when you make double stops like a quint, that's easy to do. So that's nice to do. But I can't find any hint in any literature, in books, in magazines, whatever, that violin necks are fitted to the width of the fingers of the player. It's just apparently not happening. So I want to come back to exactly that point. And then on the other side, you know, you look at some ladies with very, very thin fingers, and they have problems playing fifth. And so why do the fingerboards have to have a spacing with 17 millimeters? Maybe 16 or 15 would be much more suitable for them. I mean, some people have shoes size 35 or 34. I need 45. So making a neck or just a string spacing more narrow just by replacing the upper nut is not so difficult. It can be done quite easily. Fitting a wider fingerboard is obviously a much bigger problem, but I believe it is very, very important. My take is that we're losing a lot of teenage boys when they grow up and their fingers get like mine. Things become really difficult on these narrow-necked violins, and they have, I often felt stupid, because I just couldn't play like my violin teacher. She could play that Bach and Telemann easy, and I was really having such a hard time. But it's not the lack of talent; it's simply a physical aspect of how I'm built. So, what I'm after is that we do not lose too many young guys, playing the violin or the viola. Oh, talking about the viola. Some find an exit here because, with the viola being less regulated, less standardized, less dogmatic in dimensions, some violas have actually wider fingerboards. So lucky for those guys who are looking for a way out of this trouble, and they get a viola in their hands with a wider fingerboard. And so maybe that's one reason why some people switch over to the viola. But I like to play the viola a lot, and this is the viola that I played for a long time, and actually the string spacing on this viola was even more narrow than on my violin. And I had no idea why I was having problems with, for example, some cello suites I was playing. And I had to figure out some very, very tricky fingerings to be able to play that decently. And now I fixed me a viola that had a wide enough fingerboard, only the upper nut was not good. So I made this 19 millimeter spacing, and now everything works just fine. So how do you find out? Actually, it's very, very simple. All you got to do is put your finger down, the first, second, third fingers. That's where the problem is. The pinky is usually, small. And so the first, second, third fingers, and try to if you can play three strings with the one in the middle being stopped without touching the other two. And if that works for you, congratulations, your setup is fine. And if this happens, then it's not fine. Because then it's when you have to develop a very tricky technique only to play properly. And that's what's not working. When you play in a competition, when you play, the stuff where you are on the edge, where you have to do absolutely right and compensate for your, problem here. So you better get it set up with a wider fingerboard, like I did. And I believe for a lot of guys, male players, maybe 18 millimeter string spacing would be good. You can check that for yourself. You can find that out for yourself. Well, for a tall guy like me, I'm 1.85 m, and XL glove size. I really need these 19 millimeters, and 19.5 is even better. Maybe I could do with 20 millimeter string spacing, but I couldn't fix that to any of those instruments. Do talk to your luthier, but and see what he can do for you. But really, this is to all the string teachers out there. Make sure that your students play with a setup that matches their physique, and let's not try to lose all these young guys with big hands, because on the other hand, it's really fantastic. I can play octaves or even more very, very easily. So the length of the finger is actually quite helpful, especially on the viola. And I can use that for playing a large viola, only it has to have the right string spacing. So for the violin makers out there, I know you might not like this message because it implies a lot of extra work. But it's the same for any shoemaker, for any bicycle producer. You just cannot have one size fit all. It was never working properly. And I actually believe that in Baroque times, it didn't work like that. When you look back 200-300 years, you find that instruments were built much more differently, much less dogmatic in their size and measurements. And I believe it was pretty normal back then that the instruments were suited to the players. And nowadays we try, for the last, 100 years, we've tried to sell this one size instrument to all players. And that's not really working. So there you have it. A very old problem with quite a normal solution, I believe. And maybe this is one way to make this world just a tiny little bit better. Let's just fix the string spacing of violins. Thank you.